this meeting of this special meeting of the Carson City Airport Authority. It is Tuesday, September 4th at 12 p.m. We are at the Carson City Community Center, Sierra Room. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Chairperson Law.
Here.
Vice Chair Vowell. Member Barrett.
Here.
Member Golden. Member Harris.
Here.
Member Harvey.
Here.
Member Rogers.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you. If you would rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this time, we will go to item C, approval of the minutes of the past meeting of the Airport Authority. The draft minutes have been submitted. Do I have any discussion on the minutes or corrections or changes? Do I have a motion to accept them as written?
I move. Second.
Okay, I have a motion by, you got there first, right?
Right. Mr. Harris.
By Member Harris and a second by Member Rogers. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion, aye.
Aye.
All opposed? None heard. Motion carries. Item D, modification of the agenda. The chairman reserves the right to modify the agenda in order to most effectively process the agenda items. Items may be taken out of order. Items may be combined for consideration by the authority. Items may be pulled or removed from the agenda at any time. Do I have any suggestions for a change to our agenda today? Otherwise, I will proceed. Public comment, item E. Members of the public who wish to address the Airport Authority may speak on agendized and non-agendized matters related to the airport. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person or topic. If your item requires extended discussion, please request the chairman to calendar the matter for a future airport meeting. Any public comment at this time? Hearing none, we will move forward. Item F, there is nothing under that item today, so we will skip it. Going to public hearings. Item G, 1, for possible action, Carson City Airport Authority to consider and discuss new airport access approach off Arrowhead Drive. Mr. Moen.
Good morning. Last week, Chair Law and Gary Province and myself met with Cinderlight principals, Gary and Greg Lehman, to discuss the new entryway or approach off of Arrowhead Drive into the quarry at the at the east end of the airport. This has been in discussion for several months. It was first brought to my attention when I first arrived here that there was a goal to realign traffic entering the rock pile area instead of Bowers and Arrowhead, which is right across the street from a residential area, to move it further to the west along Arrowhead and be able to access that property that way. If you look in your handouts, there's a itemized quotation, and then on the back side of that should be a plan view of the new approach area. This was drafted by the city of Carson, Public Works Department. It has been reviewed by Atkins, and I don't believe there were any comments on that. If you look at the quotation itself, it's very detailed, and the reason that it was so detailed by line item was that some of the materials listed at the bottom we have on hand, or Cinderlight has on hand, so the costs will be mitigated by the use of those materials. The primary material that we will have to pay for, of course, will be asphalt. But the base and the trucking of all that equipment will primarily be done either by Cinderlight or the contractor. They did list all the equipment by item, whether they use all that or the signage and that sort of thing is a matter for discussion once the project gets underway. But we're estimating that the out-of-pocket between for the total project, instead of being $31,000, be the neighborhood of $20,000, which would be shared between Cinder Light and the Airport Authority. One of the discussion items we had was that we could reduce our royalty from the rock pile to cover that cost. However, I think in the grand scheme of things, I'm much more preferred to change checks just so that everything is easy to see and everybody knows where that is. But this is something they believe they can start within the next 30 days, so we decided we'd add it to this board meeting instead of waiting till the end of the month to get this considered by the authority and then make a decision on whether or not we want to get this thing going before the end of the construction season.
I might add that this has been on the table for over a year at different board meetings. We've had residents down at that end complaining to the city routinely about the dust and the strewing of rocks onto the pavement and that sort of thing. There were a couple things that we did discuss when we were talking to Cinder Light. One, we have cement culvert material on site at the airport that was left over from a previous job that will be able to be utilized on that. And they said that this contractor at this point in time is waiting for a substantial contract to be let, and it's probably going to happen in the next 60 days. And if we wait until after that point in time, we may not be able to get these prices. Because they'll be into a large project and unavailable. The other thing was we talked about the various spoil piles that are at that end of the airport and what was to be done with those, and the fence job that's coming up in a year or so. And this would be a good opportunity to improve the area for access to that pit area in cooperation with the city and with Cinder Light, and have us a substantially better area to tie into with the fence project. So those were the comments that were generally made at that meeting. Are there any questions of Mr. Moen or myself? Mr. Barrett.
Thank you. I'm looking here, but I don't see it. You said that the cost would be shared between the Airport Authority and Cinder Light. Is that a 50-50, or what's the breakdown?
Yeah, we basically talked about splitting the project.
Any further questions? Mr. Rogers.
I'm really hoping that during this conversation that you had with Cinder Light, you also talked about timing for getting rid of that giant cliff off the end of the runway that's out there right now.
Yeah, and they're in the process of mitigating that slope to the preferred 3-to-1 design that went with this contract. So if you've been out there now, you can see that they've started relocating some of that material up against the hillside. However, during our discussion, they did mention that there possibly as long as another 5 years worth of material out there. And some of that was some really big boulders that, they got to wait for the right project for that to be really usable. And then, if you look at our ACIP and some of our other plans here in the future, there may be a need for material to be brought in to raise some of the elevations out there. And so we decided that, just in our general conversation, that whatever was stockpiled there, we're going to retain until such time that we may need it in the future. There's up to like 20,000 yards of fill and topsoil. And I would hate to haul that off or sell it, then turn around and have to rebuy something like that. But the mitigation of the slope is part of their ongoing operation.
Mr. Rogers.
So did I hear that we can't expect that slope to be at the final configuration until 5 years out? Is that what I just heard you say?
No, that doesn't mean, it doesn't imply that, but it will be as part of the ongoing process. There's not a deadline to say you got to have it done by a certain date. They have to have it mitigated totally by the time they leave the site. But I imagine as we phase away from that area, that they'll just continue to complete it. They're not in a position where they want to wait and do it all at once. They want to just keep moving on it.
Does that satisfy your answer?
I guess that answers that question. I'm not clairvoyant enough to know where on Arrowhead Drive this access is.
Yeah, I didn't give you a very good perspective of the area. If you just for strictly asking you to see it in your mind's eye, if you start at Bowers Lane and then you go back towards the airport, the lumber yard is under construction. It's between the lumber yard and Bowers Lane, probably about a halfway distance.
Yeah, you know where, as you're going east on Arrowhead, there's quite an open area after you get past Harley Davidson, and then there's a building that has to do with Aloha Vitamins or something like that. It's just about 150 yards west of that building on the left side before you get to Bowers. And I know that doesn't get on the record, but at any rate, it's about 200 yards short of Bowers on the south side of the street. And they did that because that's a natural drainage that comes through there, and that's why the culverts are required and so forth. Yeah. Any other questions? Any further discussion? Any public comment on this item? I would, with that, entertain a motion as far as action on this item is concerned.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Harvey.
I'd like to move to approve the project moving forward. I think the idea of putting it together in a partnership and sharing it, I mean, all the things you've done to mitigate it have been great, and it's something that's going to really help us and help our neighbors too around us. So anyway, I'd like to motion to move forward.
I have a motion from Mr. Harvey, a second from Supervisor Barrett. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries. Moving on to item G2, for possible action, Carson City Airport Authority to consider and discuss data collected and RFQ score sheets regarding qualifications for airport architectural and engineering and planning services, contract ranking of firms, authorized chairman and staff to engage in contract negotiations. Mr. Moen.
Thank you. As you may recall, at the last board meeting, we discussed setting up the special meeting to go over the score sheets from the board members. To date, I've received score sheets from each member that's on the dais, and then have not received one from Member Golden or Member Vowell. So I completed them this morning and created a composite score sheet. Their individual score sheets are in the back of the room. It should also, you only have the composite in your handout, but I can provide the individual ones. They are coded, one representing one member, number one representing a member, number two representing another, et cetera, through number 6. And that's just for the purpose of being able to track the sheets. But if you look at the composite score sheet, it only lists them 1 through 6 as the ones that were submitted. The top part of the composite score on a scale 1 to 4 is the engineering RFQ, Atkins, Michael Baker International, Armstrong Associates, and Dyer Engineering. And then the second half of the sheet, ranked 1 through 5, is the planning services, Atkins, Michael Baker International, Armstrong Associates, Kaufman Associates, and Mead and Hunt. If you look down at the very bottom of each of those, there's a total. For engineering, the top score from all the RFQ score sheets was Armstrong at 237. And on the planning side, the top score was Kaufman Associates at 266. And so those are the score sheets in and of themselves, which ranked by the 12 categories that were listed in the RFQ. And then each of the members assigned a score based on their review of the material. And so I'll turn that back to you, Chair Law.
Okay, having received the composite score sheet and reviewed it, do members have comments or questions regarding the scoring sheet, the composite scores?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Harvey.
So, I know there was a lot of discussion at the last meeting and concerns too over the process. And after my now having to go through these without the benefit that the committee and their involvement and all they went through, I will just say this. Yes, I put my scores in because that's what we agreed to. But I'll tell you what, I want to hear from those who were in that committee who did that, because I could easily make changes based on that new data, based on the information that they went through. Not having it, I felt my hand tied behind my back. And so I'm not comfortable with the numbers yet until I personally hear from those individuals. I'm sorry Mr. Golden's gone. I know he was very vocal, and I'd love to see his scoring sheet as well, just so I have other perspectives before I am ready to push forward. As Mr. Moan knows, I had some questions and issues with the scoring process even. I initially went through 1 through 5, rated everything that way, and realized, no, you're forced rating 1 through 5. And that's a different way to look at it. I'm okay with that, but frankly, that's not how I looked at it first. And it changed things a little bit. So I'm just a little uncomfortable at this point, and I think hearing from those individuals will help me feel confident and potentially change what I did and have to redo the score numbers.
Unless our airport manager wants to go first, I'll be happy to go first.
Go ahead, Supervisor Barrett.
Thank you. And I'll break them down. Personally, I scored Kaufman highest on the planning services. So I'm in conjunction, as it turns out, with that being the majority of the group. On the other one, I frankly wasn't really keen on any of them. I misspoke the other day. I was talking to Mr. Harris, and I said that I liked Baker. What I meant was I liked Dyer. I liked Baker until the Carson City person who they designated as our contact left. So, and I went for Dyer. I see now that the group went for Armstrong. The only reason that I had Armstrong rated lower was that there was a mistake on one of the subcontractor situations, and I don't like mistakes in submitted documents, and I've made a few in my life, so I'm not casting aspersions. I just decided that I wanted to go with somebody else, and I did feel that as time went on that Baker was a little large for. They had a large footprint all over the world, and I didn't know how much they would care about a small airport in the middle of Nevada. That's it for me, and so I rated them as objectively as I could, but I understand what you're saying about the way the method of scoring was not easy. With that, I'll go get another piece of pizza.
Mr. Harris, would you like to comment?
Well, just from a summary standpoint, first of all, on the planning services, I've just been very impressed with the work that Kaufman's done up to this point, particularly they're very willing to listen and come back with something that's got more of the spin we're looking for on it. And I've just been very impressed with the professionalism and the quality of the results. As far as the engineering services, I had a preference for Armstrong. The Michael Baker situation, I was more favoring Michael Baker as well, but the person they sold so hard is no longer involved in the company. So Armstrong was my choice. After that, I think that their local experience is very good. That impressed me, but what impressed me more was as they were putting together their proposal, they were actually adding value. They were not just repeating projects back to us and that sort of thing, but actually saying, if we get this, these are the things we want to look at. They pointed out some areas where they thought maybe there was some money that some costs could be shaved off. I just thought, they went above and beyond just quoting. They were actually adding value right in their quote, and that's a rare thing to see. I thought the organization of it was very strong too. They also have some drone qualifications that I thought were strong and that we could benefit from if we were able to go down the drone path. So that was my thinking, and I'm very, very comfortable with Armstrong.
Mr. Rogers.
Member Harvey, I actually had I was sort of feeling similar to you. Well, I mean, I was feeling somewhat opposite to you. I'm sitting here looking at myself, I'm reading these submissions, and I don't have a lot of experience on the specifics of what happens at the Carson City Airport, but I do have a significant amount of experience contracting for technical services over the years. So what I hoped I was able to contribute to the effort was an unvarnished pair of eyes, shall we say, where I just was able to make my determinations based strictly on the documentation presented in front of me. It was definitely a time-consuming process to go through all of the submissions. The submissions all obviously had a lot of work put into them, and I really appreciate that. I thought that as far as the planning services go, I thought the combination of Kaufman's presentation on the RFQ and what they've done on the master plan just set them apart. I thought that they were clearly the most, I'll say, organized and professional presentation that I saw, the combination of those two items, and so I thought they were a clear winner on the planning side. I have to say, not having a local presence is a detriment. You know, it should be noted, and certainly should be noted that we wouldn't. The fact that they have chosen not to have a local presence doesn't mean we should pay more for their services, right? So that was my thoughts going forward. On the engineering side, I really struggled to create any differentiation between the four submissions. I mean, all four submissions were solid, showed a tremendous amount of experience, and I thought Atkins' submissions was quite strong. I thought, but when all was said and done, I ended up feeling that Dyer was our best choice, and that was strictly based on the level of detail that they provided relative to the subcontractors that they were going to use. They seemed like they had a very strong group of some subcontractors that they had a tremendous amount of experience with. They were all local, so in a very close horse race, I gave them the nod just based on that detail that they provided and the obvious experience that they brought to the table, or the obvious connection that they had into the subcontractor base in the local area. So that's my summary of where I came down.
Did that answer your question fully?
And hopefully,
I want to elaborate a little bit about our initial meeting and the discussion regarding the scoring sheets. When we first, as a group, looked at them and discussed how to rank them, we were not ranking them numerically 1 through 5 or 1 through 4 as far as their strengths or weaknesses. We're ranking each of the individual elements of the score sheet based on this 1 to 5, where 5 being the strongest and 1 being the weakest.
Another way to put it, Ken, would be to say that we were rating them rather than ranking them.
Correct, yes. That's a great distinction. And so what we did discover as we came back as a group during our discussion was that we found amongst ourselves it was really hard to pick and get any separation. So that's when we came back to the ranking aspect. So I know that everybody had read through the documents, done their original thought process through the various categories and coming up with some sort of value compared to that. But then they all end up with basically a score that didn't differentiate between anything. So we elaborated as that now we probably need to go through and do the ranking. And so barring that issue is how everybody kind of came to their own individual decision. There was no follow-up amongst the members after that. We didn't share our score sheets, so they were all separate. My thought going in, I'm just going to speak very briefly to this, is that I really came down that we're paying Kaufman, $500,000 to do a master plan, and then to turn around and then have them walk away from it, I didn't think was the best business practice. And having been involved with them since I came here in March and seeing the work that they've done to date, as well as reviewing the old master plan and the work that was done from the old master plan, and tying it into the new one. I really felt that Kaufman needs to see this thing through. On the engineering side, very, very tough. All those firms are very qualified. We've had a long history with Atkins, both here at Carson City, but also I've worked with Atkins at Reno, and I have great respect for their organization. Michael Baker was a new organization for me to review and get to learn a little bit about. I do kind of come down where the other members did, that for one moment we had one project manager that was really sold as being a local kind of guy, and then now not here, so it was harder to continue to maintain the same ranking. No disparaging comments to anybody in that. It's just that that seemed to be the centerpiece and how to move forward with that. Dyer Engineering, I've only met recently. I know they've done some work at both Reno Stead and Reno Tahoe Airport, both small projects, not real airfield centric. There were some hard stands up at the Stead Airport, and there was a roadway up at Reno. But I know that Heath Hildebrands' experience does stretch well beyond those projects into other airports, St. Louis, LAX, major taxiway and runway type projects. So they're certainly qualified. There was no speculation about that. I think the big thing that came down for me as far as reviewing Armstrong was the work that they're doing with airports similar to our size in our area. Atkins does that as well. They serve several little Nevada airports, so I didn't see that as a discriminating factor so much as that I think it was time to maybe get some new eyeballs on some stuff, and I think that's what I got from Armstrong's proposal, was a different perspective. Granted, that was more some planning type stuff about how to maybe handle the acreage in the middle of the airfield, the 32 acres, how you would subdivide vehicle traffic and those kind of things. But I thought they put some different thought process into it, as opposed to reading back our ACIP list and the things that we had plotted out. So that helped me come to a conclusion on that. But as one voice, I think that the Carson City Airport's in a very good position to move forward with a new contracts on both engineering and planning. I'm really happy with the kind of work that we're getting from Kaufman right now, and I'm excited about the taxiway project here, and I just see us being able to move forward without any real hiccup, whether it's an existing firm or the new firm. I think our next step, once we get through the score sheets and the discussion on that, is come to some sort of decision process. But that's my feedback.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Do we want to go through the composite score sheet line by line? Mr. Harvey.
First of all, thank you. That was really helpful to me. Like I say, I felt like I kind of got last minute and was going through it. Like you, I'm good at reading those, but still, I want to hear more depth that you went through. And that really helped a lot. Number one, I also rank Kaufman at the highest on that particular one. So it sounds like that's pretty solid as a group. And frankly, I also rank them that way. When you get into the architectural engineering, and I hear you say that was hard. I mean, there was a lot that I would have ranked them all the same. It's like, wow, in that category, I don't see a difference. Other ones, like you said, local representation and all that happened. And I found my lowest was Baker, but I looked at Atkins, Armstrong, and Dyer. We're not that far apart, really, with each other. So that was the hardest. But when it came down to numbers, when you did the force ranking, I ended up with Armstrong. Again, I could be swayed that way just because, for me, there were a lot of equality there. But just if I push the numbers, and now I'm hearing from you, I know there's a difference here between Armstrong and Dyer a little bit on what I'm hearing, but that's where mine came down. But then again, Dyer was my second, too. So just FYI, that's where I came from.
Okay, good.
And I have to say that in going through these, having been through a couple projects with Atkins, I considered my personal experience with them as well as their presentation. But I agree, as far as the Kaufman Associates part of it is concerned, I think with today's concern about separation of duties and responsibilities and that sort of thing, I believe that if we are going to spend the money with Kaufman, they ought to have to prove up what they've done. And so that was my first choice as well. As far as the engineering and architectural portion of it, I found that Atkins, Armstrong, and Dyer were all highly qualified. And it was just whether I could find certain aspects of what was on the score sheet as to how they came out for me. So I think we're all in accord with that. So moving forward from here, Mr. Takis, what would you suggest we do?
Well, the ultimate goal here is to rank the firms in each category. It's certainly the rank the top two, and then the next step would be to authorize the airport manager and myself to try and negotiate contracts with the top-ranked firms with the knowledge that if we're unable to negotiate something that we think we can bring back to you, we would go to the second-ranked firm to negotiate. So the next step would be to rank the firms.
Does anybody wish to make comment on changing the consolidated rank, the composite scores as they're shown currently? Hearing none, I would suggest that a motion is in order as far as designating the top two in each group so that staff can go forward with meeting with them and asking for proposals. Do I have a motion? Mr. Rogers.
I move that we accept the composite rankings as delivered and the ranking that they identify and authorize staff to proceed with the negotiation phase.
With the top two.
With the top two.
In each class.
Yep.
Mr. Takis, is that a sufficient motion for you?
Yes, what I would suggest for clarity of record is that what you're recommending then is that Armstrong be ranked number 1 in engineering, Dyer ranked number 2, and on the planning side, Kaufman number 1 and Armstrong number 2.
Is that
that sound
your
correct?
understanding, Mr. Rogers?
That's my understanding. That's accurate.
Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Rogers, a second by Mr. Harvey. Do we have any public comment on this item? Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All opposed? None heard? Motion carries. Okay. Okay, moving along, item H is public comment. Again, is there any public comment, general public comment on this item?
Chairman,
Mr. Takis.
Could we go back to the last item for just a minute? Could you also make a motion to authorize the chairman and staff to engage in contract negotiations? That was the other item listed in that action
Certainly.
to be taken.
Do we have a separate motion to allow the chair and staff to go forward with negotiations with those companies?
I move.
I have a motion from Mr. Harris, a second from Mr. Barrett.
Do have a question. Any guesstimate on how long this will take, or will it be the next meeting in September or the October meeting, or beyond that?
We need to work around. I'm guessing it will probably be not this next meeting, but the following meeting. That's my best estimate, just because of the things that have to be accomplished and the time that it takes to do it. I think that's realistic. I would love to be able to tell you it'll be ready in 2 weeks, but I don't think that's realistic.
Thank you.
I can underscore that because I won't be available for the next 2 weeks. The air races are in town. Okay, so we have any discussion on the motion or public comment on that portion of the motion? All right. All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. All right, moving forward, we already asked for public comment. I didn't see any. Item I, agenda items for the next regular meeting. Our next regular meeting will be on the 26th of September. And if anybody has items to include on that agenda, please get a hold of the airport manager to have them added.
Chair Law?
Yes.
Excuse me,
Mr. Mullen.
I've floated a draft agenda for that meeting already, so I'll resubmit that today, so if anybody wants to comment on it, I'd like to get it posted before I leave town on Thursday, so that it can be all up on the website and everything. And then lastly on that meeting is also in this room at 12 PM on the 26th. It's a lunchtime meeting.
Oh.
Yeah, this meeting originally was not. But then when we discovered the room wasn't available later in the day, we moved this to lunch as well. So the 26th will be in here at 12 PM. And we'll have something other than pizza.
All right, thank you very much. So if you have things, Mr. Rogers.
Excuse me for not having read the preliminary agenda for the next meeting, but I'm hoping that it includes us starting the process of a strategic plan. Is that on there?
I don't believe it's on the agenda, but I'll certainly add that.
Any other additions, suggestions at this time? None heard. Meeting is adjourned.